I'm going to talk about a subject that I have quite strong views on. This is something that I spoke about some time ago, probably over a year ago, and that video is among my most viewed videos. This is going to be quite a long video, just to give you a heads up on that, because there is a lot of issues I want to cover. If you have the patience, please bear with me. It's going to be between 15 and 20 minutes, just to give you a heads up. But there is a lot of issues I want to cover, and I would like to do it in one video. The issue I'm talking about is mixed relations, and specifically white guy Asian women relations. And by Asian, I should specify I'm talking about East Asian, so I'm not talking about South Asian, because usually when South Asian it's specified that way. Um, this is something I've noticed a lot online. There's always quite a big viral response to these sort of videos or these sort of discussions. Sometimes it's light-hearted, um, and there's this sort of inverted commas yellow fever notion that these white guys specifically like Asian women, and it's yellow fever. Sometimes it works the other way, where white women like Asian guys, but more often than not, it refers to white guys, Asian women. Now, I'm just going to give you the context because I'm not ashamed of it. I have had experience of relationships with Asian women. I like Asian women, and I'm not going to. There's no shame in that, so I'm not going to say otherwise. But I want to break down some of the issues that I feel are clouding people's judgment in this, or rather, a lot of the stereotypes come up. I want to deal with them directly. And this video is about generally mixed relations, but specifically this one, because I can directly relate to it. Like I say, a lot of these sort of discussions are light-hearted at first, but more often than not, they can end up in heated debates, and more often than not, and you see another side to it. That's why, generally speaking, I try to just avoid them. Um, it makes me uncomfortable, to be quite honest, because I think that there is aspects of outright bigotry involved in this. Um, Firstly, I'll just talk about some of the stereotypes that do exist. That is from people who are critical of these relationships. The stereotype against white guys who like predominantly East Asian women is as follows. The stereotype is that, oh, by the way, if you're wondering why I'm making another video on this, it's because I want to expand it a little bit, and the issue is still valid, and I might cover some things in this which I didn't cover in the last one. Okay, so apologies for that interruption. Yeah, the stereotype against white guys is generally that they are desperate, that they are insecure, that they are very sort of, for want of a better term, even misogynistic. That's one that I've heard. They like to control women. They're very old-fashioned in that sense. They like to control women, and they hate white women. These are the sort of stereotypes that I've heard. I've also heard many, many pejoratives like they tend to be dorky or geeks. One of the most common is the creepy white guy. That is one of the most common sort of stereotypes. Um, okay, so that's the stereotypes leveled against white men in these relationships. Now for the stereotypes leveled against East Asian women. The stereotype that they go through is that they're submissive, that they are naive, that they are self-hating Asians, that they are white worshipping. These are all the sort of stereotypes and insinuations leveled against East Asian women who happen to be in a relationship with white men. Another one is gold diggers. They are gold diggers. That's another common claim. But the thing I would say about stereotypes, generally any sort of stereotype, is there is always some truth in them. So I'm not going to, in this video, say that none of the things I've just said have any basis in fact, because clearly they do, and I'd be a bit naive if I said that none of those things were true in some cases. But Stereotypes become a problem when they become accepted as being the universal situation when they're not. And that is a problem because it inevitably leads to prejudice and bigotry. And people trying to, in some cases, even try to dictate what others should do with their lives. That's why stereotypes, without wanting to sound like I'm preaching, are a problem. Um, and in this case, I must admit, it bugs me on a personal level because I've been involved in it. And yeah, I just think it is a very narrow outlook. So let me take on some of these stereotypes directly. White men who are with Asian women are desperate and pathetic individuals. Well, if you look at some very successful white guys like Mark Zuckerberg, just as an example, would you really call Mark Zuckerberg desperate? He's a very successful man. He's one of the world's most successful young billionaires, um, and he's widely admired for his entrepreneurial skill. Mark Zuckerberg is a powerful man, and probably he could get a lot of girls, but it's my understanding that he's been with Priscilla Chan since his teenage years, and they've known each other for years, and she's been with him long before he was Mr. Facebook. So that sounds to me like a very sincere and honest relationship. In terms of desperation, this stereotype comes from the notion that white guys who are with Asian women have been rejected by white women. Well, to me, that really resonates of racism from the people making that allegation. They think they're insulting the white man, but actually, when you really think about that statement, it actually sounds like they're putting the Asian woman on a pedestal lower than the white woman. Like, oh, he can't get a white woman, so he's looking for an Asian woman as a second, third, fourth resort. Um, they don't think for a second that actually maybe the white guy just happens to be attracted to Asian women. You know, why is there a notion that someone would automatically be immediately attracted to their own racial group? That's a bit naive. Um, so to me, that is borderline racism, really. Um, and, if people don't like being called racist, then they shouldn't judge others in that sort of way. What other things are leveled against white men? Well, creepy. Firstly, I wish people would actually define what that means because I hear it all the time, sometimes from Asian women as well. Now, in the case of Asian women, I assume they have been victims of guys who really are creepy and who have been harassing them. But my argument would be you can get that sort of behavior within racial groupings. So I think it is unfair to focus just on one sort of mixed relationship. I mean, you can get plenty of examples of harassment from white guys towards white women, from black guys towards white women, black guys towards Asian women. There's many scenarios. So why is it people just focus on the creepy white guy? I really don't know where that comes from. It could be because there is a phenomenon, and it is a real problem, of middle-aged Western men going to countries like Cambodia and Thailand, and in some cases getting involved with a sex trade with some very young girls. And I'm not going to say that is not a serious issue. It is. But to then expand that to say that every single white man Asian female relationship is based on that premise is absurd. Um, Asian women in many cases tend to just naturally look younger than what they are. My argument would be if two free thinking adults are in a relationship, that's their business, but that's the underlying theme of what I'm trying to get at here. Um, so by all means, the issue with paedophilia, for example, is a real phenomenon, and those guys obviously think those countries will be a soft touch. But again, you can find that problem in any racial grouping. You can find, I mean, here in the UK, we've had a public scandal over groups of predominantly South Asian men preying on young white girls, and that's been a big issue in the UK. Does that mean that all South Asian men are paedophiles? Of course not. Does it mean that all South Asian men who are attracted to white women are the same as those guys? Of course not. So the same logic applies here. Um, So yeah, I don't know where this sort of focus on white men alone comes from. Of course, you're going to get white guys who are like that, who are they do just want to control women. But the chances are those guys would want to do it with all women. They probably happen to think that Asian women are submissive, and if they do think that all Asian women are like that, then they're very misguided because it's based on a generalization. You know, I've been socializing, I've been interacting, I've been in communication with Chinese people, specifically Chinese, for best part of 5 years, and I've met all sorts of people, male and female. I've met strong business women, and I've met girls who are more, let's say, less independent minded. So, you know, you get all sorts of people in any group of people. Um, is there white men out there who think that all Asian women are submissive? Maybe. But I suspect in more cases than people are recognizing, it is just because they happen to be attracted to Asian women. It's not a crime. Um, you know, this assumption that is based on something cynical or something malicious is just outright bigotry. Now, moving on to the stereotypes against Asian women, they're gold diggers. Some are, yeah, sure, some are. And especially in the last 10, 20 years, where the Chinese economy, I'm focusing on China this because I'm more familiar with the Chinese situation rather than other countries. But because the Chinese economy has been rising, there has been a more materialistic trend in Chinese society. And I don't mean that in a derogatory or insulting way. By the way, everything I'm saying in this video, I'm not trying to provoke anyone. I'm just speaking candidly. Um, so there has been a materialistic trend, and I think even many Chinese people would agree with that in Chinese society, similar to what a lot of Western societies have gone through. There is a materialistic trend. So are there young Chinese women who are only interested in money? Yeah, there are. But again, it isn't fair to generalize every young Chinese or East Asian woman who is interested in white men as only being interested in that. You know, I've got some very close friends, um, and I will say a personal thing here because it is valid to the video. I'm hardly a rich guy, okay? I'm not well off financially. I'm not going to divulge all my private information, but let's just say I'm not a wealthy guy, and yet I get on very well with Asian women. Now, if they were really all that shallow, why would they bother being friends even with a guy like me? Consider that for a second. If they were all that shallow, would they, you know? So it's an unfair generalization again. Of course, there are examples of that. Of course, there are. But you know, again, you can get black women who are gold diggers and white women who are gold diggers. So I think it's unfair to just tar Asian women for that brush. Maybe there's just more focus on it because there is a materialistic trend in some of those countries in recent years. Um, what else? What other stereotypes are there? Okay, the submissive thing. I sort of already covered that. There are many strong Asian women who are business women. They're very strong-minded. Um, so the idea that there's more submissiveness, I think partly this is being confused with femininity. And I want to be quite diplomatic how I explain this because I don't want people to misunderstand. Um, I think there is a perception that if a man values femininity, which is absolutely not the same as being submissive, then he wants to control women and he assumes that all Asian women are submissive. Actually, a lot of guys feel that there is a lot of Asian women who are quite feminine in terms of what would be considered traditional gender traits. And I know in the West that is a very controversial, taboo thing, and I know it's politically incorrect to say that, but to hell with that. I'm just speaking candidly. There has been a drive in recent years in the West, and I understand the rationale behind it because it's pushing towards tolerance, and that's fine. I understand that. But what I have a problem with is that certain so-called progressive movements um, attack let's say, traditional masculinity and femininity and completely demonize it. So they're calling for tolerance of, for example, someone choosing their own lifestyle, and yet they fail to realize they're actually being very intolerant of what is uh, perceived to be traditional, um, not traditional roles, but traditional, let's say, traits. So my point here would be if a heterosexual man happens to be quite alpha male, let's say he's protective of his lady, he is into sort of tough sports, for want of a better term, and let's say the lady he is with is quite soft spoken, quite she's into shopping and fashion and that sort of thing. Now, is that really a terrible thing? Is it? No, it's not. And I think there's this trend, so-called progressive trend, that basically demonizes that and says, oh, if you support that, then you're against equality and you're against tolerance. Rubbish. It's just that people like what they like. So, as a heterosexual man, I am not going to apologize for appreciating femininity. Um, if I'm in a relationship, I want to protect my woman. I don't want um, I do not want to be with a woman who sort of sticks her nose up and says, I can look after myself. So this is what I'm getting at with femininity. And people can interpret that whatever way they want, but actually what I am calling for is tolerance. So anyway, there's a perception that gets confused with submissiveness. Submissiveness is a very different thing. Submissiveness is just letting, for example, um, someone abuse you. That is completely different from, let's say, yin yang relationship where there is a balance of masculinity and femininity, which, by the way, you get in gay couples as well, and that's fine. It's completely normal. What I just don't like this notion that femininity equals submissiveness. In other words, if a man appreciates femininity, then it's because he wants to control her. Not every guy wants to be with a strong Lara Croft, powerful businesswoman partner. And so what? So what? And here's another fact: not every woman wants to be that sort of really strong um, businesswoman type figure. Some do, and best wishes to them. Everyone, everyone to their own lifestyle. But actually, the irony about this is they believe that critics of this, believe that they are condemning a sort of control. But in the end of the day, when you actually look on the surface, when you actually no, when you look deeper down, they're the ones who are wanting to control others and dictate to others how they should be. When you think about it, just something to think about. Um, what was the other stereotypes I mentioned? White worshipping. Again, there's some truth in the idea that there is a phenomenon in East Asian countries whereby lighter skin tone is admired. I won't deny that there's a phenomenon with that. If you look at, for example, Korean beauty products, there's a big emphasis on that. But what is the difference really between that and the phenomenon in many Western countries, especially in Britain, for a lot of white women to want a tan? Is it really any different? Because in Britain, a tan is considered aesthetically beautiful, and in Asian countries, lighter skin is considered aesthetically beautiful. And I think people just need to chill out and stop taking this so seriously. If you don't want lighter skin, then don't lighten your skin. If you don't want darker skin, don't tan yourself. And whatever ethnic background you're from, be happy. It's the way you are. And for God's sake, don't look down on other people, and don't worship other people either. I think part of the resentment to this white guy Asian woman phenomenon is partly from some Asian guys, and I want to be careful how I'm saying this. Some Asian guys, most Asian guys are completely fine with this. They're open-minded, they're tolerant, they're cool. Most Asian guys don't have a problem with this, but there is a minority of bitter nationalistic type guys who have got it into their head that their women hate them and hate themselves. Now, there may be an issue of body confidence, but don't blame white guys for that. That's ridiculous. I mean, actually, a lot of white guys appreciate darker skinned Asian women, for the record. What my argument would be is, a lot of young women do have an issue with body confidence. A lot of young women from all racial backgrounds, and we need to encourage them to gain self confidence. But you don't do it by dictating to them who they should and shouldn't be attracted to. That's ridiculous. So I do think there's a sort of hostility from some Asian guys that sort of think, and there is also, I think they sort of see it as some sort of Western colonialism, like, oh, they're taking our women, this sort of thing, and it's rather nauseating and frankly rather childish. Um, I mean, from my perspective, I really, really couldn't care less if a white woman is with a black guy or an Asian guy. I couldn't care less. Now, if she was a friend of mine or a relation, and the guy treated her badly, of course I would care. But if it was a mutual relationship, if they treated each other well, it's their business. It is their business, and that is what my fundamental argument in all of this comes down to. Um, like I say, some of the debate is lighthearted, and that's fine. I can understand there's humorous side to all of it, but I've also noticed that there's a very judgmental side, and to me, this is no different from the sort of hostility that existed in the United States in the 1950s to black-white couples. Really, what is the difference? Because that was also based on stereotypes. So the sort of stereotypes that we're hearing today against white men, Asian women, whilst there may be truth in them, to then tar everyone with the same brush is, to me, it's odious. I mean, I honestly see it as being as bad as homophobia. I'll put that on record. I believe judging mixed relations is as bad as homophobia or any other sort of bigotry. Um, and I'll say something else. I think that whilst there are valid arguments in terms of barriers that could come up, for example, cultural differences. And by the way, you can find cultural differences among the same ethnic group if they're from different countries. For example, if I was to date a white girl from Eastern Europe, we would have some cultural differences. If I was to date a Russian girl, there would be cultural differences. But someone saw us in the street, there would not be the same level of prejudice. Why? Because we're both white. So I really do believe there is a level of racism involved in this. And of course, I deeply resent that because I hate all sorts of bigotry. Um, so my final words on this is that unless you personally have suffered from this, i.e., if you have been let down by someone, say you're a white guy and your Asian girlfriend has cheated on you or she's used you because you've been well off or something, I can understand you being pissed at her, but don't take it out and don't assume that all Asian women are the same. Likewise, if you're an Asian girl and you have had problems with some white guys harassing you, then report those guys. But don't assume that we're all like that and don't assume that we all disrespect women. And this applies to anyone who has a sort of prejudice about this. And my final thought is if, just live and let live, basically. Unless people are breaking the law, unless they are abusing their partner, or unless it is an adult with a child, then in the end of the day, no one has a right to stick their nose into it. I staunchly believe that adults should have the choice to date whoever the hell they want. And obviously people shouldn't cheat or commit adultery. I'm not extending it to that, but as a principle, what I resent about all of this is the fact that so many people think they have a right to judge and tell people who they should and shouldn't date. Because a lot of the allegations that they're throwing out about abuse and control and so on can be found in same relation couples. I know, for example, in the black community, and that varies from country to country, but I'll use the United States as an example. There is a bit of a phenomenon with some African American women take issue with African American men liking white women, and then they then extend that to hating white women and giving their men a hard time. And my message to those women would be just the same. Um, you have a right to be treated well by a man, but you don't have a right to tell men who they should and shouldn't date. This notion about our people should stick together, to me, that is a very backward notion. And anyone who retains that notion needs to just grow up, frankly, and get into the modern world, because we live in an interconnected world, and most societies are diverse to some extent. So to me, that notion of people should stick with their own is just, it's odious. To me, mixed relations are a beautiful thing. Um, and I really, really don't see why people have so much hostility to it. I really do believe it is in the same category as homophobia. What's the difference? They're both based on stereotypes, they're both based on bigotry, and they're both based on people trying to judge and lament from above how others should live their life, others who are not doing them any harm. Okay, thank you for listening.